Okay, I think we'll make a start. Welcome to everybody, and thank you for coming to this, what I hope will be a really interesting discussion on the subject of historical memory and the fight against fascism. My name's Jonathan White. I'm a trustee of the Marx Memorial Library, and I'm the chair tonight. Sadly, I'm also a speaker, as I've had to deputise for our wonderful archivist, Marion Jump, who has had to withdraw from tonight's meeting as she's not well. She was due to be a speaker tonight to talk about the work of the library, and she's unfortunately she's not well. So, but she's given me some pointers, and I'll do my best to fill her shoes as much as I can. The way we will run tonight is that we'll have each of our speakers for no more than 10 minutes, which will leave plenty of time for your questions and contributions to them. So please put your questions in the chat, and one of our MML volunteers will be collecting these up and feeding them through to me, and I will then put them to the speakers, and then hopefully that will generate some interesting discussion. Now, normally I'd say a few words about the MML now, but the point of tonight is to look at the work of memorial organisations in fighting to preserve historical memory and educate current and future generations. So I will cover that in a short intro to my contribution. However, I will say something about the occasion for this panel. This is the second in a series of panel discussions on historical memory and the fight against fascism. In the first one, we looked at what we might call the revisionist offensive, aimed at rewriting the history of the 20th century, and in particular of the victory against fascism. And this offensive can be seen to have several related aims. Firstly, to obscure the full horror of fascist bestiality in 20th century Europe by making Nazism a peculiarity of totalitarianism, not one and the most vile example of a wider fascist phenomenon that consumed much of Europe. Secondly, to belittle the vital role of the Soviet Union in defeating Nazism and to obscure the vital role of its particular social basis in achieving that victory. And thirdly, to roll up the Soviet Union alongside Nazism as two species of totalitarianism from which Europe was supposedly only freed in 1989. Now, in the first session, historian Mike Jones talked about the way in which the military victory of the Soviet Union was belittled by a revisionism that reflected the rapid rehabilitation of German and Nazi military figures into Western European society after the war. Phil Katz unpacked the way that the Prague Declaration movement has worked to rehabilitate many of Europe's fascist parties and to demonize the Soviet Union as an adjunct of totalitarianism, even claiming it in some cases to be worse than Nazi fascism. And in my contribution, I talked about the ideological work of the concept of totalitarianism, which runs throughout the work of the Prague Declaration movement and their allies. Now, in this panel, we turn to look at organizations who work at the front line of this battle of ideas today. Memorial organizations, including the library itself, the Society for Cooperation in Russian and Soviet Studies, the International Brigades Memorial Trust, and the Soviet War Memorial Trust as well. And I'm delighted to have here Jim Jump, who is the chair of the International Brigades Memorial Trust, Ralph Gibson, the Honorary Secretary of the Society for Cooperation in Russian and Soviet Studies, and Philip Mathews, the Chair of the Soviet War Memorial Trust. And I've introduced them in the order in which they'll speak. I'll kick off now by saying a few words on behalf of the Marx Memorial Library. Now, the very history of the Marx Memorial Library is intertwined with the struggle against fascism. The library was founded in 1933 at a meeting of a newly formed Marx Commemoration Committee, 50 years after his death, in response to the rise of fascism in Europe. A library of Marxist work and working class education was seen as a fitting memorial. Ralph Fox, who attended our founding meeting, made the ultimate sacrifice, dying on the battlefields of the Spanish Civil War, as did David Guest, who was an early and popular lecturer at the library. And libraries and archives themselves, of course, become the objects of political struggles to determine historical memory. As symbols and evidential resources, controlling or saving them became part of the struggle with fascism in the 20th century. Marx's own archives, for example, were smuggled out of Germany in 1938 into Holland, and then for a while to England during the war. During the Spanish Civil War, Franco's forces used captured archives of left-wing organizations to identify and persecute people during the post-war repression. Now, in our own collections, we have some wonderful examples of the dimensions of the fight for historical memory and against fascism. And these have been used for exhibitions and are now featured on our website. For example, the collection on the impact of the Russian Revolution, which formed part of an exhibition that toured the British Library, the Modern Records Centre at Warwick and elsewhere, and which you can now view on our website. And I'll post the link in the chat later on so that you can see the kind of things that feature, the kind of objects in our collections that have featured in these exhibitions. There's our collection of protest banners, raising consciousness and resources for the struggle in Spain, which featured in a local exhibition in Islington and is now an online exhibit on our website. And there's our fantastic collection of Spanish Civil War photographs, which you can also browse online. I'll put all the links in the chat later. The library's aim is to spread knowledge and understanding on these subjects, and our educational work in promoting understanding of the fight against fascism has grown significantly in recent years. In normal times, we have a research service. Our reading room is usually open Monday to Thursday, 12 to 5. As I mentioned a minute ago, we curate exhibitions. We produce our own journal, the wonderful Theory and Struggle journal, which you get free if you join the library. Small plug there. And we run termly education programs. And Marion has developed an invaluable outreach program with schools as well. We've tried to turn the limits imposed by the coronavirus crisis into an opportunity, accelerating our digitization program and moving our courses online. And ironically, this is helping us to achieve a wider reach in some ways than we might otherwise have got. And once again, this library, as with other archives, is becoming a site of political struggle. The revision that is the occasion of these panel sessions has directly affected us, with threats being made against the library at the same time as vandals have attacked Marx's grave at Highgate Cemetery. Some school children, we find, arrive at the library with a preconception that communism and fascism are in essence two species of totalitarianism, extremist ideologies, just as the founders of the Prague Declaration movement might wish. And there is clearly work to be done around the school history curriculum. So what do we do next? Well, at the MML, we'll be continuing our current work in making our collections and our education work available to a wider audience, taking up the opportunities of new digital platforms. We'll seek to build on the collaborative work that we've developed alongside the Society for Cooperation on Russian and Soviet Studies and the IBMT, with whom we've worked closely now on a number of initiatives. And we need to think about how to develop our work in partnership where possible with schools as well. There'll be other ideas too, I've no doubt, but perhaps we'll draw that out of the discussion. Now with that, I'll finish up my contribution on behalf of the library, and I'm going to revert to my role as chair by introducing our next speaker, who will be Jim Jump. Jim is chair, as I mentioned earlier, is chair of the International Brigades Memorial Trust, and he can tell you more about the vital work that they do. Thank you, Jim. Welcome to this meeting.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm delighted to be speaking, as you said, on behalf of the IBMT, the International Brigade Memorial Trust. We keep alive the memory and spirit of the 2,500 volunteers from Britain and Ireland and elsewhere who joined the International Brigades in the Spanish Civil War of 1936 to 1939. They went to Spain to fight fascism and to defend the elected Popular Front government of the Spanish Republic. Their sacrifice was considerable. 526 of them, more than 1 in 5, were killed, and many hundreds more were badly injured. We're a registered charity, and our activities range from helping to look after more than 100 memorials around the country to organising commemorative events and working with researchers, students and teachers to encourage greater knowledge of the International Brigades and the war in Spain in general. What's pertinent to tonight's discussion is that 3/4 of the volunteers who went to Spain were members of the Communist Party or its youth wing, the YCL. So any attempt to make out that they were in any way equivalent to their fascist foes or fascists in general rouses understandably strong feelings in our ranks. Not only were most of them communists, but the vast majority would not even have been able to get to Spain without the help of the party. The Communist Party arranged their travel and accommodation through France and their clandestine crossing of the Pyrenees. We know also that many of them joined the party simply in order to take part in that fight against fascism in Spain. They joined the party because at that time it was seen as leading the resistance to fascism, whether at home against Oswald Mosley's black shirts or in Spain against Franco, Hitler and Mussolini. It's worth noting here that the attitude of the Labour Party towards the war in Spain was at first to line up behind the British government's policy of so-called non-intervention. And it wasn't until October 1937, nearly halfway through the war, when Labour's official policy changed and they finally joined the call for the lifting of the arms embargo on the Spanish Republic. Non-intervention, knowingly and probably with deliberate intent, favoured Franco and formed part of Britain's policy of appeasement towards the fascist dictators. This was a policy that led directly to the defeat of the Spanish Republic. It also led to the Munich Pact of 1938, when Britain and France abandoned another democracy, Czechoslovakia, to fascist aggression. And as the volunteers in Spain had predicted, it also led to the Second World War. So that's the background. Let's fast forward 80 years to the 19th of September 2019. And the IBMT was shocked when the European Parliament passed a motion on so-called European remembrance. And the motion drew equivalence between communism and fascism and said that, among other things, that the Soviet Union and Hitler's Germany shared the blame for the Second World War. The motion made no reference to the Spanish Civil War, to appeasement, nor to the Munich Pact. What we're seeing here is a dishonest and dangerous attempt to rewrite history. And it's against the background of a wider rise of new ultra-conservative nationalism in many countries, along with the historical rehabilitation in some countries of Nazi collaborators and the denigration of those who fought and defeated Nazism and fascism in 1945. This process didn't start in 2019, didn't start last year, but has been gathering pace over the past few years. Indeed, 10 years previously, that same European Parliament branded communism, Nazism, and fascism as, in quotes, a shared legacy. Over this same period of time, we've witnessed in parts of Eastern Europe the removal of memorials to the international brigades, as well, of course, as ones commemorating the Red Army's defeat of Nazism. This is not to say that the political legacy of the brigades is never challenged elsewhere. In Spain, there are ongoing memory wars about the Civil War and the Franco dictatorship, and memorials to the international brigades are regularly the target of right-wing vandals. Here in Britain, even in 2009, the newly elected Conservative majority on Nottinghamshire County Council decided to take down an information board about the international brigades, which stood next to a sculpture on County Hall in Nottingham showing a bombed out village in Spain. The memorial was unveiled in 1993 by Jack Jones and the Spanish ambassador in tribute to the 20 Nottinghamshire men who joined the international brigades. 9 of them were killed in Spain. To their great credit, the Labour opposition group pledged that one of their first acts when returned to office would be to reinstate the memorial, and this they did in 2013. The attitude of those Conservative councillors can be seen as a throwback to the discredited Cold War view of the Spanish Civil War, when it was depicted as a conflict between 2 evil ideologies. With it came the slandering and belittling of all those who had supported the Spanish Republic. Why? Because during the Cold War, Franco was a loyal anti-communist ally of the West and was propped up by US aid and military bases. Let's not forget that even in 1985, 10 years after Franco's death, President Ronald Reagan said, I quote, "With regard to the Spanish Civil War, I would say that the individuals that went over there were, in the opinions of most Americans, fighting on the wrong side." We had hoped that that sort of political mindset was a thing of the past. Sadly not. And in parts of Europe, the memory of the international brigades is literally being wiped out. Only last month, we alerted IBM team members to support a campaign in Croatia to preserve a threatened memorial in Perusic. The memorial names 12 local international brigaders alongside more than 100 men and women who joined the Yugoslav partisans to resist the Nazi occupation during the Second World War. This memorial reminds us that the Spanish Civil War was part of a longer war against fascism, and many of the brigaders continued the fight, whether in Allied armies or in partisan and resistance movements. We've also seen memorials taken down in Hungary, but probably the worst case of all is Poland. There, the country's Institute for National Remembrance is calling for the removal of all memorials to the Polish brigaders on the grounds that they were communists. In response, the IBMT has had to protest the Polish ambassador in London and to the mayor of Warsaw on a number of occasions. It's worth noting here that the Poles, more than 3,000 of them, and 1/3 of them Jewish, were, after the French, the second largest national contingent in the international brigades. And many of them, unable to return home after the Spanish war had ended, later fought in the French resistance. As a stark example of what's happening in Poland, I want to share a couple of images. Let's hope this works. They're taken from the Tomb of the Unknown Warrior in Warsaw. And here we go. Here we go. You'll see, this is what you would have seen if you'd visited the tomb a few years back, and you'd see there's some names of battles there, including Madrid, at the top Madrid, Guadalajara, and the Ebro. Now, if you go there now, if you visit the tomb now, you won't see those. And there's two new panels there, and you'll see the battles skip from 1920 to 1939 with nothing in between. So the question for us today is, let me get out of this screen.
Jim, your screen share didn't work. We didn't see the photos.
Okay.
Just try again, maybe.
Okay, let's see. Screen share. Does that?
That's better. That's better.
That's it, Jim.
Okay, good. Okay. Now you'll see, sorry about that. You'll see this is the panel, the former panel, which has the names of battles in which Polish soldiers have fought. And you'll see there at the top of the list, Madrid, Guadalajara, and the Ebro. And then if you go there today, you won't see those battles. You will see this. Panels dating from the First World War and thereafter, and then from 1939 to 1945, with nothing in between. So that's the scale of the problem. The question for us today is, what do we do about this phenomenon, and how do we make sure it doesn't take root in Britain? Well, the first thing, as I think as Jonathan intimated, is to support the IBMT, the MML, and those organisations represented here today. And in the in the IBMT, we believe there's a special role for memorial groups like ourselves, which occupy a public space separate from the political and the academic worlds, where this same battle for history is also being fought, of course. One of the great strengths of commemorative organisations like our own is that we have strong family links. I mean, we're talking about that we have a number of active groups around the country. I'll single out Belfast, Hull and Oxford. One of our great strengths is that we have strong ties, strong family ties, strong community ties and links with the trade union movement. So the IBMT works closely with these groups. They have a special place, a special role to play. And another priority we have is, and those groups obviously show the impact that the Spanish Civil War had on their towns and regions, which is very important when they're liaising with schools and historical associations locally and the rest. Another of our priorities now must be education. And as we know, reactionary ideas always flourish when there is ignorance. Only last year, we lost our last surviving International Brigade veteran, Geoffrey Cervantes, and his passing has underlined to us the fact that the Spanish Civil War is now moving out of living memory. And that's why we're redoubling our educational efforts. And we're currently working with a large university history department on a project to put together a range of teaching materials for Key Stage 3, that's 11 to 14-year-olds, teaching these school pupils about the Spanish Civil War and the International Brigades. And we hope to be making an announcement about this in the new year. So I'll end on this, I hope that's a positive note to end on. And there's also good news as well around the world, not least from Poland. So again, just to cheer us up, I'll show you a couple more images from Poland, which show that there's a new generation of young activists who are keen that the who are keen that the memory of the International Brigaders should live on in Poland. You'll see there's a granddaughter. She's can you see that all right? There's the woman carrying the wreath is the granddaughter of a Polish International Brigadier, Zuzanna Ziolkowska-Herczberg, and she's going to lay that wreath at the tomb of the unknown warrior in Warsaw. And there it is. It's a wreath, obviously, in the colours of the Spanish Republic and with the three-pointed star of the International Brigades. So thanks very much. Sorry I overran with the technical difficulties, and thanks very much again for the Marx Memorial Library for organising this event.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Jim. That was really fascinating. And I don't think you overran at all, even with the technical difficulties. So that was excellent. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to move on to our next speaker now, who is Ralph Gibson. Ralph is the Honorary Secretary of the Society for Cooperation in Russian and Soviet Studies. And it's my very great pleasure to welcome him to speak here tonight. Off you go, Ralph. Thanks.
Right. Well, thanks very much, Jonathan, and also to Jim for their introductory remarks. I mean, I think it's a great collaborative effort that has got us to this point, and I would urge everybody to watch the first part of this panel, which is on the Marx Memorial Library website, because Jonathan and Mike and Phil Katz laid the groundwork for what was originally intended to be a one-day seminar. This would have been the sort of part 2 for one-day seminar. So forgive the gap between the two parts, but as I say, part 1 is still viewable for anybody who's interested. So a few words about the Society for Cooperation in Russian and Soviet Studies. I mean, first of all, the Society, right from its beginning in 1924, has had the aim of fostering knowledge and understanding of the USSR. It was founded as the Society for Cultural Relations between the peoples of the British Commonwealth and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics by a group of very notable British academics, social figures, people like E.M. Forster, George Bernard Shaw, Virginia Woolf, J.M. Keynes. I was reading up today on the founding event in July was the resolution to form the society was moved by the British economist J.A. Hobson, whose works apparently influenced Lenin and Trotsky on imperialism. So quite an august bunch right at the beginning. And from the very start, the idea was to increase knowledge, general knowledge about the Soviet Union. Needless to say, that carried on especially during the Second World War, when in 1941 the British government suddenly needed to expose people to information and background to the Soviet ally from the June the 22nd, 1941, when Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union. And our archives here detail a very active 4 years for the Society in terms of lectures, exhibitions, film shows, language learning, and clearly a very important role played in all sorts of different areas and across the country. Major events in most of the major cities across the UK, and that's the kind of background in terms of what's relevant tonight. Is that, of course, the Society and its members, and I think to a large extent the British public, recognise the immense role of the Soviet Union in the defeat of fascism. And I think Mike, in the first part of this panel, was quite clear. In 1945, there was no doubt about who was the victor, who had been defeated, and why it was necessary to defeat fascism. And unfortunately, of course, in the period since, that has been some of that has been lost. After the war, our work continued in terms of developing knowledge and understanding of the Soviet Union. But of course, a key element of that was maintaining and informing people about the role of the Soviet Union in the defeat of fascism and the liberation of much of Eastern Europe, against a background of a Cold War, which was aimed at diminishing or excluding that role. And as Mike said, to create the extraordinary situation where the war on the Eastern Front, to a large extent, the history in Western Europe was written by the defeated, by the Germans, rather than by the Soviet victors. And there's no precedent for that in history, where the losers get to write the history. It's very important that, from the Society's point of view, that that role is remembered, and we're very proud here that in the 1990s the Society was instrumental in creating the Soviet Memorial Trust Fund, which has become the Soviet War Memorial Trust, and Phil will tell you afterwards, give you much more detail about the creation of the memorial. But that came out of a desire for the UK to have a permanent national memorial to the Soviet war dead here in the UK. And as I say, we're delighted that the Society played such a key role and continues to do so in that memorial. So as an educational charity, our collections and our events continue to be directed at increasing understanding between the peoples of the UK and Russia. At the moment, of course, COVID is creating problems for us all, but we do our best with the limited resources that we have to maintain a programme of events, allow researchers to our archives, members can access and loan books from our library, and we as our name suggests, are very keen to cooperate with other organizations to develop that primary aim, to develop knowledge and understanding of the USSR and Russia and the successor states of the USSR. We also maintain strong links with partners in Russia, particularly in St. Petersburg. And of relevance to this panel is our developing contact with the Piskarovskaya Memorial Complex in Leningrad, which in St. Petersburg, what is now St. Petersburg, which marks the mass graves of hundreds of thousands of Leningraders who perished during the war. As far as the present day and the future is concerned, we would certainly be keen to develop materials, educational materials and educational resources, because I agree with both Jim and Jonathan that, you know, the educating the present and future generations is part of our task, the task that is presented to us. We have some valuable resources here: books, posters, photographs, materials from the Second World War, which we would expect would make up part of our contribution, but also our own membership in terms of historians of the Second World War who can contribute to common efforts. Certainly from my point of view, and the trigger for the panel in the first place, the European Parliament motion, in my own view, it cannot be allowed to stand equating the actions of Nazi Germany and the USSR. I believe that increasing knowledge and understanding between peoples is one way of helping to ensure that we guard against any resurgence of fascism and that the horrors of global conflict never happen again. So cooperation with other organizations, including MML, IBMT, and the Soviet War Memorial Trust, will be vital, ensuring that in the immortal words of Olga Bergholz on the Piskarovskaya Memorial, no one is forgotten, nothing is forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ralph. That was fantastic. Really, really interesting. I'm just starting my own video there. That was fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to move straight on to our final speaker in the panel session, who is Philip Mathews, who is the chair of the Soviet War Memorial Trust. And he's going to finish up our panel session, whereupon we will begin a bit more of an open discussion. If you have specific questions that you want to ask any of our speakers, please do put them in the chat now or when Philip's finishing his talk, and then we'll put those to the speakers and open up a bit more of a discussion on that basis. Okay, over to you, Philip. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Yes, thank you very much, Jonathan. Yes, it was the 50th anniversary of victory in Europe in 1995, and I was asked by the Russian embassy if I could arrange for services to be held over Soviet war graves at Tidworth Military Cemetery and Shaftesbury Town Cemetery. I must admit, having lived in this area all my life, I didn't know Soviet war graves existed. So, however, I approached the commandant of Tidworth Garrison and the mayor of Shaftesbury, and they were both agreeable and very helpful. I also found an Russian Orthodox priest who was a teacher at Marlborough College, who was teaching Russian there, to come and officiate at the services. And we arranged for the event to take place on the 30th of April, just before VE Day. Members of the British Legion, the Arctic convoys, and veterans of the Normandy landings took part, and a coachload of children from the embassy school in Kensington came, along with the air attaché, and also Jean Turner, who was then secretary of the SCR, and Stanley Foreman, who was chair. I approached the Prime Minister at the time, John Major, and told him what I was doing, and he very kindly sent me a message to read out at both ceremonies. After the Tidworth ceremony in the morning, everybody came back to my house in Wilton for lunch before moving on to Shaftesbury, where another ceremony took place. And a former nurse who looked after one of the Russians came back after 50 years. She was getting on a bit, I agree. But needless to say, the Russians made a great fuss of her. Following the success of this day, in June that year, I approached the then Russian ambassador, Mr. Adamatian, and suggested that perhaps there should be a war memorial placed in London, the capital, and he agreed. I then approached the SCR and they agreed that we would put it before the next AGM following year. And following that, myself, Jean Turner and Stanley Foreman met with the Deputy Ambassador in London, and the thing started to take off then. Of course, we had to find somewhere to put the memorial, and several ideas came up, and I happened to be at a meeting in the Imperial War Museum, and I approached Lord Bramall, who was president of the Imperial War Museum, about the park. What I didn't know was the park belonged to Southwark Council, not the Imperial War Museum. And we approached them, and it was like pushing an open door. They were only too happy to supply some ground in the park for the memorial. Well, things started to move fast then, and the following year, 1997, we held a meeting at the Imperial War Museum with the SCR, supporters of the Arctic Convoy, the International Brigade, and RAF veterans to try and set the whole thing up. And it was agreed that the monument was going to be made in Volgograd, it's formerly Stalingrad, and the whole idea was supported by the British government. In May 1998, we had a site dedication in the park, and this took place in the presence of the Russian Foreign Minister, Mr. Primakov, and George Robertson, the Secretary of State for Defence. And the following year, on May the 9th, the monument was finally unveiled in the presence of the Duke of Kent, who was president of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, and by the Russian ambassador and the Secretary of State for Defence, George Robertson. And I have to say, George Robertson was very, very supportive all the way through, trying to get firms that traded in Russia to give us support. But we had to find £25,000 for the base of this monument. President Putin has visited twice with me, also the Speaker of the Russian Duma, and strangely enough, the direct descendant of the last Tsar of Russia. Our work now is to promote the work of remembering the 27 million peoples of the former Soviet Union, 13 million service personnel and 14 million civilians who gave their lives in the defeat of fascism. That's something we must never forget. And now our job now is to educate further generations of the suffering that these people suffered in the Second World War. We do owe it, and I think Winston Churchill said, never forget the Red Army, because even he knew what we owed them. I think that's all I need to say, Mr. Chairman. That's basically the history of the Soviet War Memorial. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Philip, for that. And I think I'm just going to, before I invite any questions or make any further comments, I just want to, I think it's interesting to think whether or not how easy it would be to attempt to do something like that, what you've done with the Soviet War Memorial Trust now, in the slightly different political atmosphere in which we're operating. Fascinating to hear how much political, cross-party political consensus it was possible to have on that issue at that time.
I would like to pay tribute to Jean Turner, who was the first secretary before Ralph Gibson, who worked very hard on this project with me, and I do want to pay tribute to Jean. She did a tremendous job. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, at this point, I'm gonna ask our three speakers to turn on their microphones and their cameras and rejoin the discussion. And if anyone has any questions for the speakers, specific questions for the speakers, please do put them in the chat, and they'll be fed through to me as the chair. While people are cogitating and thinking about whether they're going to do that, I want to take. I'm going to abuse my position in the chair to ask an initial question, really, of all of our speakers, which is about the role of commemorative organisations and what. Well, there's two questions really. The first one is, what more do you think working together as much as possible, or working in partnership as much as possible, what more do you think, what are the priority things that organisations, commemorative organisations like ourselves have, what is it that we can be doing to widen our reach, I suppose, and raise awareness of the work that we do and the issues that we commemorate? And a related question, actually, one has just come in, which I will come to in a second. Well, maybe actually let's just start with that first of all, on the specific issues that of what it is that commemorative organisations can do. Let's start with that one. Does anyone want to have a crack at that?
I'll start off if you like, Jonathan. I mean, I mentioned it in my introductory remarks that I think we occupy a very important space. That's the same battle of history is going on in academia and obviously in the political arena, but we, if you like, occupy that space in between or separate from those arenas, and we allow for public participation, if you like. So you don't have to be an academic, you don't have to be a politician to join in with us. We allow for local activism, which is good, because that's how you reach, in many cases, various towns and cities and regions where people don't realise there's often a local angle to what we're speaking about. And we've got the flexibility to engage in collaborative projects amongst ourselves, as we're doing tonight, and also with other organisations. So I think, I would say this, wouldn't I? But I think commemorative organisations have a very, very special role to play. And as Ralph touched on, in the preservation of libraries, of archives and the rest. And I mean, one of the things I hope, after those of you listening tonight who aren't familiar with the International Brigade Memorial Trust, will look on our website, and one of our great treasures there is a list of the more than 2,000 individual brigaders, their basic details. In some cases we don't have many. When we have a photo, we put a photo up. So that compilation of that sort of material isn't done overnight. It's years and years of work, and it's a work in progress, and no doubt we'll pass it on to another generation. But it's all vital stuff that wouldn't otherwise be done, and it's only organisations like those represented here that do that sort of thing.
Well, if I can put in, I think of relevance to this conversation is, of course, that the rise of right-wing thinking and the far right and fascism is, of course, it's no accident. Of course, it's happened after the demise of the USSR, which played a vital role from 1945 to 1991 to making sure that the fascists didn't regain their power and influence, particularly in Europe. And I think so in terms of anybody looking at the rise of the right, the far right, it's useful to remind them that until 1991, there was a country whose who saw it as one of their primary tasks to ensure that the rise of fascism was never, a rise of fascism was never allowed to happen again in Europe. And we should be grateful, I think, more grateful than we are, that to a large extent they were successful. And what's happened since the breakup of the Soviet Union is, of course, in many Eastern European countries, very retrograde steps. It's interesting that Phil Katz, in the first part of this panel discussion, talked about the particular role of the Baltic states and Poland, and I think it was Hungary, in terms of the Prague Declaration movement, in starting this ball rolling of equating fascism and communism, the Soviet Union with Nazi Germany, Stalin with Hitler. I mean, so again, these things all play against each other. So, in brief, the library that we have here in Brixton is a living, breathing memorial to the Soviet Union, and it's vitally important that, as you have to now be 35 or 40 to even remember there was such a country, we need to constantly remind people that there was a country that fought against Nazism with us, and did so for particular reasons, which again Mike Jones was very good at discussing in the first part of this panel. But yeah, I mean, I don't know whether Phil has anything to add.
Yes, I agree with what the last two speakers have said, and also we've got to educate the young people. How many young people now in this country don't realise that parts of the British Isles was under fascist control, namely the Channel Islands, and we're prisoners of war and all nations were worked to death there, and and it's sad that people don't realise this. And I do know young people, when you tell them that, they can't believe it. And also, if I may, some years ago, I arranged for the Duke of Kent to go there on Liberation Day and attend the Slave Workers Memorial at Westmount Cemetery. And a couple of months afterwards, I met him in Dorchester at an event, and I said, how did you get on in Jersey? Oh, he said, thank you so much for arranging that. He said, I learned things about the Nazi occupation of Channel Islands that I never knew. Now, if somebody like that didn't know everything that was going on there, I do wonder about education. I really do.
I think that's something we might come back to nearer the end, when we sort of talk about what a little bit about next steps for really. But and I know I'm certainly something I'm very interested in. But what I'm going to do right now, with the panel's permission, I have here Simone Rossi, who is the chair of the UK branch of the National Association of the Partisans of Italy. And I would like to bring Simone into the discussion to give us a bit of information about that organisation. Is that all right with everybody? I think that would be a really interesting thing to do. I'm going to ask him to unmute now, and hopefully, Simone, are you able to speak?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Fantastic.
Sorry for abruptly getting into your panel.
No, welcome to the meeting, and please do introduce yourself and the organisation you speak for. Okay,
so as I wrote in the comments, my role is the chair of the UK branch of AMPI, which is an acronym which stands for the National Association of the Partisans Italy. So as the name states, it was founded during the war in 1944, as soon as Rome was liberated, and it was above all a veterans organization, but it also grew into being an anti-fascist one as soon as the war ended. So among the many goals and missions that the organization has, of course, there is memory, keeping the memory, and teaching about the history of the resistance above all Italian resistance to the new generations. So it's not only a veteran organization which is attached to the Ministry of Defense down in Italy, but it's also an anti-fascist charity registered in Italy, and we also registered in the UK a few years ago. And of course, it's open to like people like me who were not really fighting during the war, too young. So what we do is mostly organizing events with schools, not much in the UK to be honest, but schools and public events aimed at people, the general and wider audience, to address specific topics of refer to the resistance, maybe to bring to the wider audience memory of people or specific events which faded with time, and also to tackle revisionism, which it's an issue everywhere in Europe, to my understanding. In Italy is not really safe from it, especially as I wrote in the comments, when the two blocs, the Soviets and the Western blocs, somehow ended to be enemies, and one of those ceased to exist with the end of the Cold War. A party which was had taken the legacy of the fascist party, of Mussolini fascist party, finally went into power. So for 49 years, it was basically forbidden from being in power in Italy, not even at local level. Even when they were polling fairly well, they were just no party, liberals, centrists, communists, no one wanted to do any alliance with them. But then, things changed, and this opened the floodgates to a very strong wave of revisionism, which first of all tried to equate fascists and Nazis to people who were fighting against them. So the narrative which was introduced by media in the discourse, with the help also of some anti-fascist parties, was that in the end there were young people who believed in freedom and democracy, other young people who felt they were patriots, and by fighting with fascists and Nazis, they were defending their homeland. So, I mean, there shouldn't be the acronym against fascism should be dropped. And then after that, we start seeing, rehabilitation of fascism. So now we are to the point that's like partisans who were fighting in the Eastern, in the Balkans, Italian and non-Italian, they're basically criminals. Partisans in Italy who were affiliated, especially to the Communist Party, but not just to that one. They all were thugs and criminals, and they were not really fighting for freedom. So we are really facing these kind of things in Italy, and I understand that same sort of discourse is happening everywhere else, maybe with different tones, different kind of languages and examples. But that's why I was suggesting in my comment, maybe if we can in the future organize another event or series of events like these ones to widen the perspective on the continent. So just also to put what's happening here in the UK into a wider perspective, because everything is part of the same sort of trend. I don't want to say there is a homogeneous, coherent plan, but definitely there is a trend which is the same everywhere, and it's coincided with a shift to the left in many countries, to the right, sorry, in many countries. I mean, parties which were not, like AFD in Germany, would not have been existed maybe 20 or 30 years ago. So thanks for giving me a few minutes. I hope it wasn't too long.
No, thank you, Simon. That was really very interesting, and I think you're absolutely right. I'm just to say that we do need to look at this, and will benefit from looking at this across Europe, because that is, of course, exactly what the Prague Declaration movement and various right-wing organizations who are contesting memory across Europe and political memory across Europe are doing. They're working across borders, and so should we be. So I think you, in the chat, you make a suggestion that we possibly organize a future event that looks across Europe. I think certainly on behalf of the library, we would be very open to that, and I think there would be a lot of benefit in doing that. So we will take that as a concrete suggestion about something we might do to in the future. I want to we have had some questions coming through in the chat now, and I want to there's one here which I want to put to the panel, which is about the difference between memorialization and memory. And so the question asks essentially about, well, it says that the discussion has been focused mostly on memorialization of military and diplomatic history. How do we move on towards bringing in a richer history of social of a social and political memory? How do panel members suggest we move on from that? Does anyone want to have a go at that?
Well, I think it's an interesting question. I think one of the things replying to Simone is of course the resources that we have available and what we ourselves are capable of doing. And I think this panel and the part one are an example of, by working together we can have more impact. And I certainly think that the idea of reminding people that the Soviet Union existed and what it stood for is part of our role here in terms of utilising the archives and the materials that we've collected over almost a century. And I think similarly with Marx Memorial Library, particularly its focus on the UK. So these things tie in together. And as I referred to the particular topic of this panel on the fight against fascism, there are lots of other directions we can go in, but in this particular one, I think we've got there's a lot of common ground between our organisations and organisations like ANPI, and I think as far as we're concerned, and the Soviet War Memorial Trust, if Phil doesn't mind me saying, is of course bringing in colleagues from Russia and the former Soviet and other parts of the former Soviet Union to bring them into this discussion.
Thanks, Ralph. Jim or Philip, do you want to contribute on this one?
Yeah, well, I think a memorial, a physical memorial, is something where people go to pay their respects and lay wreaths and flowers. Memory, yeah, it's very important, and I think you need to collect people's memories, especially a lot of them now. And I mean, Jim Jump made the point that the last brigadier died, and there's none left now to talk to. I think there's people like that we've got to get their memories down. And we last few years, not this year, of course, because of COVID, but we've had Soviet veterans, some in their 90s, have come over from Moscow and taken part. And people like that, you've got to talk to them and get their memories and get it recorded, for future generations. That's my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, well, I don't see there's not a conflict between, if you like, memory and memorialization, as I understand the term. Memory is important, obviously, that is particularly for archives and for historians to refer to. But there is, I mean, we call it a battle for history. So when you fight battles in the, in the political and the diplomatic and the military sphere, and memorialization or commemorative organizations like ours have a role to play there. I mean, trying to link what we're talking about now with Simon's excellent contribution, the other thing is that we're not just fighting fascists. We should remember that these ideas that this rewriting of mid-20th century history has gone mainstream, and we're fighting there. If you read, you can read The Economist or read, mainstream historians like Niall Ferguson. They all buy into this idea that the Soviet Union was equally responsible for the Second World War and all this other nonsense. So, we fight that by educating the public, by commemoration, all these other means, and memory has a role to play there. But neither should be exclusive to the other, and we respect both sides of both ways of doing it.
Thanks, Jim. I have a question which sort of arises from what you've just been saying, which is about media. I suppose, how do we begin to cut through and project the kind of education that we're talking about in more widely using the media? Are there opportunities to use the media more than we have done? Do we have sympathetic outlets? The Morning Star, the questionnaire notes that the Morning Star is reliably sympathetic on these issues, and will run stories on precisely this issue and runs features on it. But are there ways in which we can break out of to a wider audience using the media? Jim, do you want to take that one?
Well, I wish there was an easy. There's not an easy answer, is there? We do what we can, and we in the IBMT do what we can. I'm sure everyone else here does the same. It's very difficult, and I think it's paradoxically, in a way, I think since the demise of the Soviet Union, the quality of reporting of these sorts of issues isn't as good, because I'm old enough to remember those Cold War days, and at least the opposing position was put, if you like. It might have been tugged away at the end, the final paragraphs, figuratively speaking, but at least it was there, because there was a binary world, and people had to know what the two sides were thinking. I think the trouble with much of the media now, without going off into a rant about it, is that we don't hear two sides of the story. It's very monolithic view, and this is the danger we're facing, isn't it? These views have gone mainstream. They're not questions, they're rarely challenged, and it's up to us to challenge it, but it's very difficult. And we do what we can. I'd be interested to know maybe if we join together it would help, as we're doing tonight. But we chip away, don't we? We do our best. Education, lobbying. We wrote, after the European Parliament, the infamous motion was carried last year, we wrote to disgracefully, the Labour MEPs voted in favour of it, and we engaged in a correspondence with them. Very unsatisfactory, I'm sure, from both sides. Certainly we weren't pleased, but we do what we can. Hopefully some of those people have gone away and have had second thoughts about what they did and why they put their names to that motion.
Yeah, well, if I could say, I echo Jim's. The media landscape is not terribly favourable at the moment, but as I think somebody's mentioned in the chat, the social media, I think, for younger people, they're increasingly accessing their information online. And I think one of the things that we've tentatively talked about and was mentioned in the first panel was some basic building blocks in terms of creating resources on websites, on websites and things like that, so that in terms of utilizing what we already have, which is contemporary materials from the Second World War and post-war, so that if people are out there on the internet seeking out information from the other side, or a different perspective, then it should be readily available to them, and so that anybody approaching any of our organisations who wants to know more about the period before the Second World War, during and after, they've got somewhere where they can find, primary source material, articles, videos, comments, films, whatever that we can bring together. And I think that's something practical that our respective organisations can do. I mean, I think the Soviet War Memorial, as Phil has described, I mean, the veterans, unfortunately, the number of veterans who are coming is diminishing each year, but what they're being replaced by is the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And the very fact that there is some physical memorial that they can go to and enable them at least once a year to bring those memories together is vitally important. The fact that the memorial exists in the park surrounding the Imperial War Museum means it's seen by an awful lot of people. And again, maybe that's another part of our work, is to ensure that that people interested in what that memorial is, as they walk past, they can find out more information and link into more information. So that's one practical thing that maybe we can do without expending huge financial resources, which none of us have.
Thanks, Ralph. We're moving sort of towards near the end of the meeting. I want to give people a chance to sum up with any kind of extra thoughts that they have at the end. I have a question here about what the motivation for the EU motion was. I think actually, rather than getting into that again, I think it would be, I think I'm going to advise that the people, everybody, to go and access the first meeting, which the link to which I've put inside in the chat, because that was very much about that motion and about the political forces behind that, and it was dealt with in a lot more detail. I don't really want to retread, with respect to the question, I don't want to retread that ground because it was dealt with in quite a lot of detail in the first session. So have a look at the link in the chat to that first meeting. There's a couple here. There's one here which I'm going to read out. It's which is about schools, and I think this is a really interesting issue. So the question is, it may have been addressed in the earlier discussion, but from what I've seen among friends and acquaintances, the GCSE curriculum has a huge amount to answer for in terms of mainstream revisionism. I have a friend who's essentially been radicalized by teaching this curriculum for several years, is now obsessed with Churchill and Niall Ferguson, and yet thinks she represents the sensible centre. I'd be interested to hear ideas about how we can begin to lobby and apply pressure to change the Cold War forged narrative of the 20th century history as currently taught in almost every school. And I think that's a really very interesting question. I think, does anyone want to share their thoughts about that thorny issue before I ask one more question, and then I'll ask everyone to wrap up, I think.
Well, it's something we tear our hair out about as well when we look at the curriculum. It's terrible on so many counts. I mean, just to be particular about Spain, I mean, Spain is lucky if it gets a mention, and it was this major war, major stepping stone towards the Second World War, and you're lucky in many of the textbooks if it gets a mention. I think because of the inconvenient truths involved, that Britain's position was disgraceful, and then that's what happened after the war in the Cold War. So yes, a bit. How do we get the curriculum, the national curriculum, changed? I mean, anyone fancy writing to Michael Gove to the last revision? I don't know. They happen about every 6 or 7 years, I think. I think I was told there's due for another one, and we have been giving it in the IBMT. We've been giving it some thought about whether there's any intros we might have, just to say, well, to get some historians maybe to say on our behalf that there's the curriculum as it stands isn't good enough. So that's all I can offer that for the education. But I think paradoxically as well, there is, I mean, it's always good to be on the positive side as well, rather than I noticed, you know, we go around and talk to schools when we're invited and the rest of it, that paradoxically, because the Cold War is now you have to be of a certain age to remember the Cold War, to be around when to remember the Soviet Union. But if you like, communism is no longer the bogey word it used to be. You know, certainly when I was a kid, and in fact, it's now, you know, it's even flipped over and it's got a certain cachet, isn't it, with some young people. So that's useful. We can get over that hurdle. That's not that this. I'm talking now about a younger generation. This isn't. We're not talking about the mainstream media or historiography or anything like that. But certainly amongst younger people, a lot of that baggage they no longer carry that baggage, and that gives us an opportunity to speak less defensively, if you like. You know, I mean, I look back at what our predecessor, or if you like, with the part inheritors of the International Brigade Association, which was the veterans organisation, and of course they spent all their time, a lot of their efforts, in countering Cold War narratives of what the International Brigades, the Spanish Civil War was about. Okay, they've come back from Eastern Europe, and there's still a problem in Spain. There's this kind of rewriting of the 20th century, mid-20th century, but there's also this opportunity, you know, I mean, we find that for many people now, the International Brigaders are these, you know, they were these cuddly old lefties when they were still alive, and now they're kind of heroes in the pantheon of working class and radical history's heroes. So there are some opportunities opening up, I think, and I think probably I can't speak for the other, but I'm sure even with the way the Soviet Union is considered, there might be some opportunities there now that younger people are coming to this afresh. I mean, we're lucky if they know anything about communism, actually. I mean, so it has to be explained to them, but that is maybe an opportunity.
Yeah, well, I think as far as the SCRSS is concerned, I mean, we've been fighting ignorance about the Soviet Union for almost a century, and I'm certainly determined that we continue to do so. But it's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to be easy. Combating effectively, 50, 60, 70 years of propaganda in the other direction, and maybe, we're not going to. Realistically, we're not going to change the UK national curriculum, but what we can do, as I say, is for people who are seeking out an alternative, for young people or their parents, or organisations or schools or whatever, trade union branches that want to look at different perspectives, then we perhaps need to have those resources ready and waiting. It's preparing for this. If somebody asks me what have you got, I would say, well, we've got lots of materials, but actually pulling a single item or a single work from our collections, which would answer all their questions, it might be a bit more difficult. So I think it's certainly going to, I'm going to go away from tonight to try and sort of think about what we might offer in terms of, say, a top 10 items from our collections, which might contribute towards a website dedicated to the memory of the fight against fascism. And I think it's, because we could go off in all sorts of different directions, but in the particular direction that this panel, and I hope future ones, which we can perhaps build upon, is this insidious equating of fascism with communism, the Soviet Union with Nazi Germany, and totalitarianism, which Jonathan referred to in the first panel. So, and I suppose that's one of the, again, looking at positives, maybe looking at joining forces with representatives from other countries. We might broaden this out from the UK to the rest of Europe. So, I mean, even the tentative discussion about having some kind of international conference, but maybe that's a bit ambitious. But maybe, you know, a year's time, 18 months' time, because that may well be the kind of step that you need to take to impact on the media here, is to have some kind of major event where you draw in historians and people from across Europe to an international conference, as we so successfully showed for the October Revolution centenary. That you know, if we put these things together, there are people out there keen to participate.
I think, thanks for that, Ralph. I mean, that's interestingly, you referenced that conference, and somebody else has just done that in the chat. And I think there's a lot to be said for that idea. I think that's, yeah, very interesting. And somebody else has also just made an observation about the importance of the Popular Front against fascism in all its contemporary forms. And I think actually that's a very interesting point too. There's going to be a discussion. There's going to be a lecture at the Marx Memorial Library on the issue of the Popular Front in the next, well, I think it's at the beginning of next month, but I haven't got the link to hand. I think there's a lot to be said for the suggestion of thinking again about a conference that might be unified around the idea of the victory over fascism. What was it that actually determined victory over fascism, and what was the fascism over which the Allied powers triumphed? You know, what underpinned it? I think that would be a really interesting suggestion. I want to give everyone a chance to say one more thing, but I'm going to anything else that they wish to say this evening. But I've had a specific question that I want to put to everyone because I think it's really to the point. Someone has put in the chat, if you could recommend one book each to help educate ourselves about your organizations, the issues that your organization campaigns around is commemorating, one book that we could go away and educate ourselves with, what would it be? I'll take each of you in succession. Jim, do you want to start off? Jim, you're on mute. He's trying to avoid the question.
Sorry about that, yeah. We often get asked this, and I always reply. There's a great choice. There's some great historians of the Spanish Civil War out there. Paul Preston comes to mind, obviously. But in fact, she was one of his pupils back in the day. Helen Graham was written in the very short history series, I think by, is it Oxford or Cambridge University Press? I think it's Oxford University Press. She's done a very short history of the Spanish Civil War, Helen Graham. It's brilliant. It covers succinctly, you know, the military side, the social side, the political side, the diplomatic side, and the cultural side, and the memory as well. So it's very much from the perspective of today. It's an excellent study, so I'd recommend that.
Thanks, Jim. Philip?
Well, I would say any books written on the Battle of Stalingrad, because that was the turning point in the Second World War. There's no doubt about that.
Thanks, Philip. Ralph, what's yours? What's your book? What's your book of choice?
My book of choice. Well, I think following Phil, I mean, Mike Jones. I think in the chat there are several historians which have taken perhaps a more objective or a more sympathetic view to the Soviet struggle in the Second World War. I mean, Mike Jones, his series of books are an incredible journey through the war on the Eastern Front, particularly his interviews with veterans. Jeff Roberts has done several books on the Second World War, and again, interesting that you, in contrast to many other historians, you can talk about the same things but do it in a different way, which gives you a different perspective. And So in terms of who you might read, I would certainly recommend those two historians. And Richard Overy did a very good book on Total War. I think it was called Total War, which again looked particularly at the war on the Eastern Front. And I think, as you know, anybody involved or anybody with any sort of background, it was a very different war than the war that we're aware of in the West and in Britain. It was a war of annihilation, a race war, as Mike described it, and these historians have managed to, I think, convey some of that in their writing. So anyway, yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone. And I want to give each of the speakers an opportunity to say one more thing if they want to about what priorities for action moving forward, really, because and I'm gonna kick off because partly on behalf of the library, but partly on behalf of myself, because I've been thinking and scribbling away as people have been talking, and I think if we were doing what the Prague Declaration movement do, they have been the people who've been behind that have been plotting and planning how they influence agents in society and political agencies for a long time. And I think it behoves everybody who wants to fight for the historical memory of the victory over fascism to think about how they might do the same things too within their own organizations, but also what can they do to work together around these issues. And I think that the suggestion of a further meeting that looks across borders at the issues around across Europe is a fantastic one. That was Simone's proposal. I also think, like Ralph, there's a lot of merit in thinking about working towards some kind of big conference, but anything that brings people in and allows us to build bigger networks of people from events like that, then all kinds of things might flow. So I would be keen to think about us, the potential for our organizations cooperating around some kind of conference that looked at the victory over fascism and the importance of contesting the revisionism over the victory over fascism. That's all I wanted to say. Philip, do you want to say anything else before we wrap up?
First of all, thank you very much for organising this event tonight, Jonathan. And yes, all I want to say is carry on the good work of defending the former Soviet Union and what they did in the Second World War. We wouldn't probably be sitting here tonight discussing this if it wasn't for them. We'd probably be under the Nazi jackboot. So yes, we're going to carry on educating people and reminding them what we owe the former Soviet Union.
Thank you, Philip. Jim or Ralph, any last parting thoughts?
Yes to a conference. I think that sounds like an excellent idea. If it can generate media and other interest, that sounds great. I mean, we're talking about the long war against fascism that began in the early 30s and ran through, certainly with the defeat of Nazi Germany in 45. Of course, for us in the IBMT, the war didn't end then. Spain remained under Franco's jackboot until 1975, and the IBA, the veterans of the International Brigade, carried on campaigning to their great credit right through to the restoration of democracy. So there's a slightly different take for people who are interested in the Spanish Civil War there. But yes, yes to a conference on that. And the other takeaway, in general terms, it's not all doom and gloom. There are positive things, we've mentioned them. There's opportunities with education. I think we can all help each other there. I think there are opportunities with the younger generations, I said before, who are now arriving without that ideological baggage. So let's move forward. I think these two seminars have been really important, because these have been, as far as I know, the only public airing of, as a result of that disgraceful European Parliament resolution, has had the effect of at least stirring some kind of public debate, and we are the public debate. And from us and from these acorns, I think hopefully something bigger will grow.
Thanks, Jim. Ralph, you get the last word.
Well, just to say thank you for chairing tonight, and wish Mariam well in her recovery. I think I just echo, Jim and Phil. We can't do everything. We're all small organisations with limited resources, human and financial. But as we have demonstrated, I think with the Russian Revolution Centenary Conference, is that by pooling our efforts and our opportunities, we can do things that individually we can't, or would be much more difficult for us to do. So I think certainly the idea of taking forward this series with broadening it to other countries, I think is a great one. And as I say, if that then leads to some kind of bigger event or publication or series of publications or a website or whatever, then I think these panels will have done their job in terms of provoking some concrete results. And I suppose that's what I would part with, is let's see if we can put our heads together and find some concrete things that we can take out of these two events, not least, of course, the recordings of both of them. So I think somebody was asking, so I think you can remind them that, yes, they're both going to be available on the MML website.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you very much for that, Ralph. Yes, the recording will be available on the website. Please do check the links for the organizations who've been represented here today, the IBMT, the SCRSS, and the Soviet War Memorial Trust. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you for coming and representing your organizations and helping us to all find out a bit more about each other's work. And we will undoubtedly learn off each other's work as well, to the greater good of all of our causes. I want to thank the speakers for coming tonight, and I want to thank everybody else who's turned out tonight and for the fascinating questions that were put through the chat. Thank you very much for your attendance, and look out for the recording when it goes up on the website tomorrow. With that, apart from a simple plea to join all of our organizations. If you're not a member of all of them, then you're definitely missing out. I would urge you to do so. Membership is lifeblood. And with that, thank you very much to everybody involved. Cheers.
Thanks,
Good night.
Jonathan. Bye-bye. Good night.